I said nothing. And that silence was the most powerful thing I'd ever done in my 61 years. My daughter-in-law found that out the hard way. Her name is Vanessa. Not the Vanessa from some dramatic movie, just a 34-year-old woman from Mississauga who believed, with complete sincerity, that marrying my son meant she'd inherited the right to reorganize our entire family around her preferences. My son, Fletcher. He was 31 when they got married, old enough to know better, young enough to think he did. My wife's name is June. We've been married 36 years. She grew up in Sudbury, taught elementary school for 22 years, and can make a butter tart that will make you reconsider everything you thought you knew about pastry. She is not dramatic. She is not loud. She doesn't fight unless she has to, and even then, she'd rather make you tea and talk it through. That's exactly why what happened at our son's convocation dinner hurt as badly as it did. I should back up. Fletcher got his MBA from the Rotman School of Management in Toronto. Took him 3 years of night classes while working full-time at a logistics company in Brampton. I won't pretend I fully understood what he was studying. Supply chain optimization, something about enterprise resource planning, but I understood what it meant. He'd worked hard, real hard, the kind of hard that means your wife barely sees you on weeknights, and you fall asleep at the kitchen table on a Wednesday with a cold coffee and a case study open in front of you. June and I were proud, genuinely, completely proud. We drove down from Owen Sound the morning of the dinner. June had bought a new blouse, pale green. She'd had it tailored, and she'd gotten her hair done at the salon on the main street near our house. She looked beautiful. She was glowing the way mothers glow when they've watched their child work for something and finally see it pay off. Vanessa had been Fletcher's girlfriend for 2 years before they got married, and his wife for another 2 years after that. In total, 4 years. I want to be fair. In the beginning, she was fine, polite, distant in the way some people are when they're figuring out if they like you. I gave her time. June gave her more. But somewhere along the way, I still couldn't tell you exactly when. Something shifted. Little things at first. She'd correct June in conversations. Not harshly, but consistently, the way you correct someone who keeps mispronouncing a word. June would mention something about Fletcher's childhood, and Vanessa would say, gently but firmly, Fletcher actually told me it happened differently. Fletcher, sitting right there, would look at his plate. She'd changed how he dressed. Not a bad thing necessarily. He looked more put together. But she'd also changed where he spent his holidays, which friends he kept in contact with, and, gradually, how often he called us. In the first year of their marriage, it went from weekly calls to every 2 weeks, then once a month. By year 2, June was the one initiating every time. I mentioned it to Fletcher once carefully. He said he was busy. I said I understood. I let it go. The convocation dinner was at a restaurant in downtown Toronto. One of those places on King Street where the menu doesn't have prices listed, and the chairs are beautiful but somehow uncomfortable. Private dining room, maybe 30 guests. Fletcher's colleagues, a few of Vanessa's friends, her parents, her brother, and then the 4 of us. June and me, and my brother Ted with his wife. Ted and I had driven down together. He lives in Barrie. We'd stopped for gas and Tim Hortons on the 400, the way we always do, and he'd talked the whole drive about how proud he was of Fletcher, how their grandfather would have been proud, how this was the kind of thing that made everything worth it. Ted's a big man, not one for sentiment usually, but he teared up a little when he said that. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and kept driving. The dinner started well enough. Fletcher looked great, confident, a little nervous, the way you are when a big moment finally arrives. He greeted us at the door, hugged June, shook my hand the way men do when they want to, but don't quite know how to hug their fathers. Vanessa was beside him in a red dress, perfectly composed. She kissed my cheek. She hugged June briefly, the way you hug an acquaintance at a work function. We found our seats. Ted was telling a story. The wine was poured. I started to relax. Somewhere around the appetizers, I noticed June had gotten up to find the restroom. She'd been gone a few minutes when Vanessa excused herself from her conversation and followed. I didn't think anything of it. I found out later what happened in that hallway. June told me afterward quietly, in the car on the drive home. She'd been washing her hands when Vanessa came in. She'd turned to say something. June couldn't even remember what, probably something kind and ordinary, and Vanessa had stepped very close to her. Not aggressive at first, just close. I need you to understand something, Vanessa had said. Tonight is about Fletcher, not about you and how proud you are, not about your family's feelings. Tonight is about what he and I have built. June told me she'd been so surprised she hadn't responded right away. She'd just looked at her. I think it would be better, Vanessa continued, if you and your husband kept things low-key. Don't make a big show of things. Don't try to make the night about yourselves. June said something then. She said she'd simply said, "We're just here to celebrate our son." Simple. Gentle. The way June says everything. That was when Vanessa put her hand on June's arm. Not a friendly hand, a firm one. "Maybe next time," Vanessa said, "you could just send a card." June came back to the table. She sat down next to me. She picked up her fork and she ate her salad. And she smiled when someone told a joke. And she did not say a single word to me about what had happened until we were on the 400 heading north, and the city lights had faded behind us. That's the kind of woman June is. She didn't want to ruin the night. She didn't want to make it about her. I should tell you what happened after the appetizers, because this is the part that still sits in my chest like a stone. Fletcher gave a speech. Of course he did. It was his night, and he's always been a decent speaker, even as a kid. He talked about the program, about his professors, about the challenges of balancing work and school. He talked about his colleagues at the table, named a few of them by name. He talked about Vanessa, how she'd been his rock, his partner, how he couldn't have done it without her patience and support. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Then he looked toward our table. "And of course," he said, "my parents made the drive down from Owen Sound." That was it. That was the sentence. Not their names. Not a word about the 36 years of small sacrifices that put him in a position to sit in that restaurant and receive that degree. Not a mention of the respite my wife and I had started when he was 6 months old, the one we'd drained to help with his undergrad tuition. Not a mention of the summer he was 19 and worked at my shop so he could save for school, and how every Friday he'd hand me his hours, and I'd write his check and feel something I didn't have a word for. Something like watching a seed understand it's meant to become a tree. My parents made the drive down from Owen Sound, like we were guests who dropped by. I clapped. Ted clapped. June clapped, and her eyes were bright, and I knew she wasn't going to cry, and I knew that restraint was costing her something real. On the drive home, after June told me about the hallway, I drove in silence for a long time. Ted had taken his own car back to Barrie. It was just the two of us, and the highway, and the dark. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I didn't want to ruin his night." "June, it's done," she said. "I just want to go home." I called Fletcher the next morning, not angry. I've learned over 6 decades that anger is the least effective tool in most situations. I called him and I said, calmly, that I needed to tell him what his wife had said to his mother in that restaurant bathroom. I said it plainly, without editorial. There was a long silence. "I'll talk to her," he said. "I'm not asking you to fight with her," I said. "I'm asking you to understand what happened. Your mother has never once asked for recognition. She's never asked for anything, and last night in a restaurant bathroom, your wife told her she should have just sent a card." Another silence. "I'll talk to her," he said again. I let it go for a while. 2 weeks, 3. June didn't bring it up. She went back to her routines, her walks, her book club, her Thursday morning coffee with her friend from the school board. She seemed fine. She is good at seeming fine. I wasn't fine. I was turning it over and over in my mind the way you turn a stone over in your palm, looking for something useful, finding only more surface. What I kept coming back to wasn't even the hallway. It wasn't the speech. It was the pattern. 4 years of June initiating calls that went unreturned for days. 4 years of Christmas plans adjusted at the last minute because Vanessa's family had a scheduling conflict. 4 years of Fletcher calling her very traditional when her friends asked why his parents weren't around more. As if June's desire to see her son was an eccentricity rather than a reasonable human impulse. I have a friend, a man named Archie, who I've known since we both coached minor hockey in Owen Sound in the 90s. He's a straight-talking man, the kind who says what other people think but talk themselves out of saying. When I told him what had happened, he said, "She's not difficult, Ev. She's strategic. There's a difference. Ev is what people call me. My name is Everett. Everett Chambers. I was born in Collingwood, raised in Owen Sound, and I have run a small plumbing supply business on the edge of town for 28 years. I am not a complicated man. I don't have grand theories about people. But Archie's word, strategic, lodged in my brain and stayed there, because here's what I knew. Vanessa was not unintelligent. She was not thoughtless. Everything she did with a reason. The question I started asking myself was, what was the reason? I think in the end it was control. Not malicious, not villainous, just the particular need of someone who decided that the people already in Fletcher's life were competition for something she wanted exclusively. His attention, his loyalty, his future. And the way to win that competition, apparently, was to shrink us down to a manageable size. Make us smaller. Make June feel, slowly and consistently, that she was asking for too much simply by existing in her son's life. I decided to wait, not out of cowardice, not because I didn't know what to do. I waited because I've spent 61 years watching what happens when people force confrontations, before the other person is ready to see the truth. It doesn't work. You just become the villain in their story. You just give them a reason to pull away harder. So I waited, and I paid attention. Here's what I noticed over the following months. Fletcher was not happy. Not in the way you'd expect someone to be unhappy. He wasn't sullen or withdrawn. He was performing happiness. You can see the difference when you know someone well. The laugh that's half a second too fast. The way he'd say, "Everything's great," before you'd finished asking how he was. The particular brightness in his eyes that meant he was working hard at something. I didn't say anything, I just noticed. And then, in November, 7 months after the convocation dinner, my phone rang on a Tuesday evening. Fletcher. Not June's phone, mine. "Dad," he said. "Can I come up this weekend?" "Of course," I said. "Does Vanessa?" "Just me," he said. He arrived Saturday morning. I picked him up from the GO bus station. He'd taken the train to Barrie and the bus the rest of the way. He looked tired. He looked the way a man looks when he's been carrying something heavy for a long time and finally put it down for a minute. We drove to the shop. I had some inventory to sort, and Fletcher used to help me in the stockroom when he was a teenager, and I thought it would be easier to talk if our hands were busy. It usually is. We worked for an hour before he said anything real. "I talked to her," he said. "About what she said to Mom." "I know," I said. "You told me. She says Mom misunderstood." I didn't say anything. I kept counting fittings. She says she was just trying to set expectations for the evening, that she didn't mean it the way Mom took it. I set down a box of pipe connectors. "Fletcher, your mother has been a teacher for 22 years. She is not in the habit of misunderstanding plain sentences." He was quiet. "Your mother," I continued, "has also not called you once since that dinner. Not because she's angry, because she's waiting for you to call her. She's been waiting for 7 months. He looked at the floor. "I know," he said. "Then what are you here to tell me?" He took a breath, and then he told me. All of it. Things I hadn't known, or had half known, but hadn't let myself look at directly. The way Vanessa monitored his phone calls. Not overtly, but she'd always be in the room, always listening. And he'd found himself keeping calls short because the conversations afterward were exhausting. The way her version of we had gradually contracted to mean only her and him, excluding everyone else by attrition. The comment she'd made once, late at night, that his parents were a lot, and that he needed to think about what kind of relationship he wanted to have with them going forward, as a grown man, as a husband. He'd repeated that last phrase to himself, I think. As a grown man, as a husband. He'd turned it over and decided she was probably right. That distance was maturity, that needing your parents was something you outgrew. He'd been wrong, and he knew it now. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've let her convince me that my family was the problem." "And I don't think that's true. What changed?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "She said something to her mother last month. About you and Mom. I heard it. She didn't know I was listening." I waited. "She said you were low-effort people, that you weren't worth the energy of managing." He said it flat, without inflection, like he was reading it off a page. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "And what did you think when you heard that?" "I thought about every single time Mom drove 6 hours in a day to help us move," he said. "And I felt sick." We didn't talk much after that. We finished the inventory. I locked up the shop. We drove to the house and June made lunch. Soup and sandwiches, the way she always has. The kind of lunch that doesn't announce itself but just appears, and is exactly what you needed. Fletcher sat at the kitchen table and watched his mother move around the kitchen, and I watched him watch her. And something in his face was very young for a moment. Not childlike, just young in the way we all get sometimes when we see clearly what we've been taking for granted. "Mom," he said while she was at the counter, "I need to apologize to you." June turned around. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look relieved. Exactly, she just looked at him. "I know," she said. And then she put down the ladle and she sat across from him, and the two of them talked for a long time while I did the dishes. I'm not going to tell you it was all resolved over soup. It wasn't. Fletcher and Vanessa went to couples counseling. His idea. She agreed eventually. Whether that marriage survives, I genuinely don't know. That's not mine to decide or predict. What I know is that my son called us regularly. After that Saturday. What I know is that June cried once, on the phone with him, in a way she hadn't cried in years. Not from sadness, from relief. And that I had to leave the room because I wasn't going to manage my own face. I never confronted Vanessa. I never called her strategic or calculating or told her what I thought of the way she'd systematically trimmed our family down to a size that was convenient for her. I never raised my voice. I never issued an ultimatum. I just stayed who I was, consistently, reliably, the same man my son had watched his whole life, and I waited for him to find his way back to that. People ask me sometimes, friends, my brother Ted, Archie over a beer at the Legion on a Friday, what I would have done differently, whether I should have confronted her earlier, whether silence was weakness. I tell them what I believe. Silence is only weakness if you're silent because you're afraid. I wasn't afraid. I was patient. There's a difference. June's the one who said it best, actually. We were walking along the bay in Owen Sound one evening in January, the kind of cold that makes the air feel clean and sharp, and she said, "You know what I keep thinking? I keep thinking that we raised him well enough that he found his way back on his own." She was right. That was the whole point. Not the confrontation, not the evidence, not the dramatic moment of reckoning. Just the fact that we had, over 30 years, built something in our son that was stronger than 4 years of erosion. That's the only revenge I ever wanted. Not Vanessa's embarrassment. Not her apology. Just my son, standing in our kitchen, looking at his mother like she was someone he'd been missing. I can see it now. I can see it just fine.